The spaceport bazaar was a chaotic, pulsing artery of interstellar commerce, where 1,000 languages clashed in the air like an out-of-sync orchestra. Vendors shouted over one another, hawking everything from fusion reactor spare parts to delicacies that looked suspiciously still alive. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, grilled meat, and something that Daniel Carter could only describe as burnt regret. He had been here before, several times actually. This was the kind of place where you could find what you needed if you knew where to look, and Daniel had a knack for finding what he needed. Usually that meant replacement parts for an aging freighter or something cheap and unhealthy to eat. Today, however, his search was cut short by something else entirely. She stood by a vendor's stall, examining a piece of metal with a careful, almost reverent touch. She was tall, slender, and unmistakably alien, not in the way that some species were, with scales, extra limbs, or unsettling numbers of eyes. No, she was eerily human, save for the long, pointed ears that twitched slightly as she turned the object over in her fingers. Daniel wasn't the kind of guy to be easily mesmerized. He'd spent too many years patching up rusting ships, dealing with clients who thought fair payment meant exposure and a firm handshake. But something about her, about the way she studied that small piece of metal, made him pause. The vendor, an amphibious creature with a face like a disappointed toad, looked utterly bored as she examined the item. "You buy or no buy?" he croaked. The woman didn't respond immediately. She just stared at the object, as if trying to will some hidden truth out of it. Daniel didn't know what possessed him, but before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped forward, slapped a few credits on the counter, and picked up the object himself. "I'll take it," he said. The woman's head snapped up, and for a moment, she looked utterly startled. "You." He held the object out to her with a casual grin. "Here, consider it a gift." She hesitated, looking between him and the small metallic token now resting in his palm. Then with slow, deliberate motion, she took it, and that was when everything changed. Her fingers curled around the token, and the moment her skin made contact with it, her expression shifted. The cool, distant air she had carried before was gone in an instant, replaced by something Daniel couldn't quite place. Shock, awe, something dangerously close to reverence. A faint tremor ran through her frame, and for a fleeting second, he swore the very air around them seemed to hum. Daniel said, scratching the back of his head. "Just to be clear, that wasn't some kind of sacred artifact, was it? Because if I just accidentally committed interstellar blasphemy, I'd really appreciate some kind of warning before the angry space priests show up." She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. Instead, she looked down at the object in her hand, then back up at him, her golden eyes wide. "You do not understand what you have done," she said, her voice hushed, almost breathless. Daniel tilted his head. "I mean, I gave you a thing. It's not exactly a galaxy-shattering event." She swallowed hard. "For you, perhaps not. But for me, this changes everything." Okay, that was officially concerning. Daniel took a small step back, glancing around as if expecting hidden cameras to pop out at any moment. "Listen, I'm all for making someone's day better, but you're looking at me like I just handed you the meaning of life. It's a trinket, a scrap of metal with some scribbles on it. If you don't like it, I can get you something else. Maybe one of those glow-in-the-dark space slugs. People seem to love those." She exhaled sharply, but it wasn't frustration, more like she was trying to steady herself. "You do not know what this is, do you?" she asked. Daniel glanced at the object again. It was a small, circular piece of metal, slightly worn with age, with intricate carvings etched into its surface. Definitely old, but hardly impressive compared to the kind of tech he saw on a daily basis. "Not a clue," he admitted. She studied him for a long moment, as if assessing something deep within him. Then she spoke again, her voice measured. "This is a calling stone." Daniel blinked. "Okay, that sounds important." "It is." "Important like it belongs in a museum? Important or important like congratulations? You just agreed to an unbreakable blood pact, important." A pause. Daniel groaned. "Oh no." She closed her eyes briefly as if gathering herself, then looked at him again. "In my culture, a calling stone is a bond. It is not given, it is earned. It is meant to link two souls, no matter the distance between them. Once it is activated, it cannot be undone. Daniel rubbed his temples. So just to clarify, by handing this to you, I accidentally signed up for, what? A psychic pen pal? A cosmic marriage? An interspecies buddy cop movie? Her expression remained unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something between regret and curiosity. It is complicated, she admitted. That's never a good answer. She finally took a step closer, her golden gaze locking onto his. You may not have known what you were doing, but the stone does not choose lightly. It would not have reacted to a stranger. The fact that it did means that, in some way, we are now connected. Daniel groaned again and threw his hands up. I swear, I was just trying to be nice. She tilted her head slightly, considering him. Then kindness has cost you more than you realize. Daniel let out a long, suffering sigh. Story of my life. The vendor, who had been watching the exchange with growing amusement, finally leaned forward and croaked. So you keep or return for refund? Daniel shot him a look. Buddy, I don't think a refund is on the table anymore. The vendor grunted. Too bad. No store credit either. Daniel turned back to the woman, who was still staring at him with that same intense, unreadable expression. He had the distinct impression that he was now in way over his head. So, he said, hands on his hips, what happens now? She hesitated. Then very softly she said, we find out why the stone chose you. And with that, Daniel's life took a turn he was absolutely not prepared for. The moment Daniel realized he might be in actual, genuine cosmic trouble was when Alindra stopped looking at him like an ordinary idiot and started looking at him like a particularly important idiot. The kind of idiot that stumbled into something bigger than himself. The kind of idiot that, in all likelihood, was about to be someone else's problem. And Daniel Carter had spent his entire life very carefully avoiding becoming anyone's problem. So, he said, shifting his weight onto one foot as he rubbed the back of his neck, this calling stone thing, let's say, hypothetically, I don't want to be cosmically, psychically, or otherwise permanently bonded to someone I literally just met at a glorified space flea market. What's the return policy on this situation? Alindra, still holding the small metal token, studied him in silence for a moment. It was deeply unsettling. She had this way of looking at him like she was cataloging every possible outcome of his existence, and all of them somehow ended in complications. Finally, she sighed. There is no return policy, Daniel Carter. Figures, he muttered. The universe really should start issuing disclaimers before stuff like this happens. He expected her to snap at him, or at least show some sign of exasperation. But instead, she just looked down at the calling stone in her hand. Her long fingers traced its edges, her expression unreadable. Daniel glanced at the sky above the market. The artificial atmosphere was a patchwork of faint energy fields, shimmering against the deep void beyond. He had seen a lot of weird things in his life. Half of them mechanical failures that should have killed him, the other half bar fights that almost did. But this was new. So, he tried again. When you say bonded, are we talking metaphorical, or are we talking actual, science fiction-y, weird space magic connected? Alindra hesitated, which was never a good sign. The calling stone was created by my people long ago, she said finally. It was meant to link two beings, two souls, in a way that transcends distance. It is not merely an artifact. It is a living construct. It recognizes something within its bearers, something compatible. Daniel blinked. So I didn't just give you a gift. I activated it? She nodded. That's great. That's fantastic, he said, voice rising. I have no idea what that means. A flicker of something almost like amusement crossed her features. Neither do I. Comforting. Alindra finally exhaled and crossed her arms, still holding the stone carefully between her fingers. I need to speak with someone about this. There are few left who truly understand the calling stones. But if anyone can tell us what has happened, it will be the Vailari elders. Right, Daniel said. And they are where exactly? She hesitated again. Ah, he said, nodding. Let me guess. On some remote, sacred, heavily guarded planet that doesn't take kindly to uninvited guests? More or less, Daniel sighed dramatically. Of course they are. This was exactly why he avoided anything remotely mystical. He was a mechanic, a problem solver, a guy who liked things that had clear, defined answers, like how a ship's engine worked, or why you shouldn't drink the glowing blue liquor sold in unmarked bottles at the back of a space station bar. Mystical, ancient relics? Not his thing. But then he looked at Alindra again, at the way she held the calling stone, like it was something both precious and terrifying. And against his better judgment, he sighed. Okay, he said, clapping his hands together. Worst case scenario, I'm now psychically linked to an alien woman who may or may not have space magic. Best case scenario, I get a fun story out of it. Either way, it sounds like I need to stick around for a little while longer. Elindra's expression shifted slightly, like she wasn't quite sure how to react to him. You are taking this remarkably well. Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm panicking internally, Daniel assured her. I'm just also very good at pretending everything is fine while my brain quietly screams in the background. That at least got a small, reluctant smile out of her. Come, Ma, she said. We should leave before... A sudden, sharp sound cut through the marketplace, a high-pitched pulsing tone, followed by a ripple of alarmed shouts from the surrounding vendors. Elindra tensed immediately. We are out of time. Fantastic, Daniel muttered. Trouble already? She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him into motion. We need to leave. Now. Great, he said as they weaved through the crowd, dodging vendors and confused bystanders. Would love some context, by the way. Who exactly are we running from? Elindra's jaw tightened. The people who smuggle artifacts like the calling stones do not do so without purpose. If this one was here, on this world, it means someone put it here. And if they realize what just happened, they will come for it. And by it, you mean you? She didn't answer. Daniel groaned. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear today. The shouting behind them grew louder, and when Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder, he caught sight of figures pushing through the crowd, tall, armored, and very determined looking. Yeah, okay, definitely not the friendly kind of people, he muttered. Elindra pulled him toward a narrow side alley, moving fast, her long ears twitching slightly as if listening for something beyond his human range. This way, she said. Daniel barely had time to think before she dragged him into the darkened passage, away from the chaos of the market. And as they ran, two thoughts went through his mind. One, he had absolutely jinxed himself by thinking this would be a normal day. Two, he really hoped this bonding thing didn't mean that if she got shot, he'd feel it too. Because that would really suck. Daniel Carter had many skills. He could patch up a spaceship with nothing but duct tape and misplaced confidence. He could sweet-talk a customs officer just enough to avoid getting his cargo searched. He could even, on particularly good days, walk into a bar fight and come out with more money than he had going in. Running for his life, however, was not a skill he had planned to refine today. The alleyway was narrow, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through without toppling over a stack of crates that smelled suspiciously like pickled space squid. Elindra led the way, moving with the kind of grace that made it obvious she had done this before. Daniel, on the other hand, had all the agility of a man who spent most of his time fixing ships instead of sprinting through dangerous backstreets. Hey, just out of curiosity, he panted as they rounded a corner. How much trouble are we in on a scale from mild inconvenience to galactic manhunt? Elindra glanced back at him, her long ears twitching. If they catch us, they will kill me and take the stone. Possibly in that order. Daniel groaned. Oh, good, so we're at very bad. I love very bad. The sound of boots hitting pavement behind them sent a fresh shot of adrenaline through his system. They were gaining. Got a plan? He asked, dodging a low-hanging pipe. Yes, Elindra said. Keep running. Ah, the classic, hope they get tired before we do strategy. Solid. She shot him a look that suggested now was not the time for jokes. They burst out of the alley into a wider street filled with market stalls and pedestrians, most of whom barely spared them a second glance. This was the kind of place where running was just a normal part of the daily routine. That way, Elindra said, nodding toward a set of rusted stairs leading up to a loading platform. Daniel followed, his legs protesting with every step. I just want you to know, he said between breaths, this is not how I plan to spend my afternoon. Nor did I. Yeah, well, I was picturing something with significantly fewer people trying to shoot us. The moment they reached the top of the platform, Alindra skidded to a halt, nearly causing Daniel to crash into her. What? He started, then saw the problem. The platform led to a docking bay with a solid metal gate blocking the only exit. Please tell me you have a way past that, he said, already dreading the answer. Alindra frowned. Not immediately. Of course not, because that would be too easy. The pounding of footsteps behind them made it very clear they had about 5 seconds before things got significantly worse. Daniel scanned their surroundings, his mind scrambling for a solution. That was the thing about being a mechanic. Problem solving was practically in his blood. The only difference was that, usually the problem was a broken hyperdrive, not imminent death. And then he saw it. A cargo drone, hovering just below the platform, its metal arms carrying a crate of something that looked suspiciously like bootlegged engine parts. More importantly, it was moving out of the docking bay. You trust me? He asked Alindra. Her ears flicked slightly. No. Great. Perfect. Love the enthusiasm. He grabbed her arm. Jump. What? He didn't give her time to argue. With a deep breath, he yanked her forward and leaped off the platform. For a split second, he was very aware of how bad of an idea this was. Then they hit the drone. The impact was not graceful. Daniel landed hard on his side, rolling across the top of the crate, while Alindra somehow managed to twist mid-air and land in a controlled crouch. Show off. The drone wobbled slightly under the sudden weight, but kept moving, gliding smoothly out of the docking bay and into the open air of the city. Okay, Daniel gasped, clutching his ribs. New rule. Next time I get to do the cool landing, and you can fall on your face. Alindra ignored him, her eyes scanning the city below. We need to get to your ship. You need to get to my ship, Daniel corrected. I was doing just fine before all this started. Thank you very much. She gave him a look that could have melted steel. You were chosen by the stone. That makes this your problem too. He groaned. You keep saying that like it explains anything. Before she could respond, a high-pitched whine cut through the air. Daniel turned just in time to see one of their pursuers, decked out in sleek black armor, leap from the platform and land on another drone, already drawing some kind of energy weapon. Oh, come on, Daniel shouted. Is everyone in this galaxy better at jumping than me? The pursuer raised his weapon. Daniel grabbed the nearest loose object, which turned out to be a canister labeled Caution, extremely flammable, and hurled it at the guy's head. The canister struck home, sending the attacker toppling backward off the drone. There was a moment of silence. Then Alindra turned to him, one brow raised. Was that luck or skill? Daniel grinned. Little bit of both. She exhaled. Then let us hope your luck holds. The drone carried them toward the outskirts of the city, weaving between buildings as alarms blared in the distance. Daniel let out a slow breath, watching the docking bay shrink behind them. So, who are those guys exactly? Ilindra's expression darkened. They are called the Varkesh. They deal in stolen artifacts, lost technology, and worse. And let me guess, the Calling Stone is very high on their wish list? She nodded. And now, so are we. Daniel scrubbed a hand down his face. Great. Fantastic. You know, I was really hoping to go at least a week without making any new mortal enemies. Ilindra's gaze was unreadable. I did not ask you to help me. Yeah, well, he muttered. I've never been great at minding my own business. The city stretched out beneath them, neon lights flickering like a living organism. Somewhere out there, his ship, his freedom, was waiting. Assuming they lived long enough to reach it, Daniel had done a lot of reckless things in his life. But riding a stolen cargo drone through the smog-choked skies of a city while being hunted by a gang of professional artifact smugglers was starting to rank very high on the list of decisions he would deeply regret if he lived long enough to regret things at all. The drone wobbled beneath them as it veered away from the market district and toward the outskirts of the city. Daniel gripped the edge of the crate tightly, his knuckles turning white. Not to question your excellent judgment, he shouted over the wind, but where exactly is this thing taking us? Alindra, crouched beside him with the grace of someone who was entirely too comfortable with high-speed escapes, glanced at the drone's control panel. It is following an automated route to a warehouse facility outside the city. Daniel groaned. Of course it is, because nothing about today is allowed to be easy. A burst of blue energy crackled past them, missing the drone by inches. Okay, Daniel corrected, ducking instinctively. That was too close. I take it back. I'll take mildly inconvenient over actively being shot at any day. Elindra's ears twitched as she glanced behind them. They are persistent. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder and immediately regretted it. 3 sleek hover bikes were weaving through the air in pursuit, their riders clad in the same dark armor as the attacker from earlier. Yeah, I'd say persistent is an understatement. Daniel yanked a wrench from his tool belt, because honestly, it was the only weapon-like thing he had on him, and tried to come up with a plan that didn't involve plummeting to his death. Elindra, meanwhile, had already moved into action. She steadied herself, narrowed her eyes, and, with a single fluid motion, leapt off the drone. Wait, what are you doing? Daniel sputtered. She landed squarely on the nearest hover bike, grabbed the rider by the collar, and, with an almost effortless motion, threw him off into the open air. Oh, that's what you're doing, Daniel muttered. Yeah, okay, that works too. The now unoccupied bike wobbled before Elindra swung herself into the seat, expertly riding it. She turned the bike sharply, aiming for the other pursuers. Daniel, still clinging to the drone, had exactly 2 thoughts. 1, he had absolutely underestimated this woman. 2, he really needed to learn how to do cool stuff like that. Elindra shot past him on the hoverbike, drawing fire from the remaining pursuers. The air crackled with energy blasts as she ducked and weaved, forcing them into a high-speed chase through the towering industrial buildings. Daniel, still lacking a real plan, took a deep breath and did something monumentally stupid. He jumped. For a brief, terrifying second, he was airborne, weightless in the open sky, with nothing between him and a very unpleasant landing except his own questionable decision-making skills. Then he hit the second hoverbike. To his credit, he mostly landed on the seat. To his opponent's credit, they were very unimpressed. The armored figure let out an annoyed grunt and tried to shove him off. Daniel, still holding on to his trusty wrench, did the only thing that made sense. He swung. The wrench connected with the bike's control panel, sending out a shower of sparks. The engine sputtered wildly, and suddenly, both of them were in freefall. Oh, come on, Daniel shouted as the city blurred past. The hoverbike spiraled downward in a barely controlled nosedive. The smuggler, who apparently had some level of self-preservation, decided that this was a good time to abandon ship and bailed out, deploying a small thruster pack to slow his fall. Daniel, unfortunately, had no thruster pack. Bad idea. Bad idea. Very bad idea. He yelped, frantically yanking at the broken controls. The bike shuddered, wobbled, and, by some miracle, righted itself just before it could make a Daniel-shaped crater in the street below. He let out a wheezing breath. Ha! Ha ha! See? Totally had that under control. Elindra, now circling back toward him on her own bike, raised a single elegant brow. Did you? Absolutely not, he admitted. She exhaled and gestured for him to follow. Then keep up. The 2 of them streaked away from the city, leaving behind the chaos of the pursuit. Daniel, still gripping the handlebars with the enthusiasm of a man who really didn't want to die today, took a shaky breath. So, that was fun. Elindra gave him a long, unreadable look. Then, to his surprise, the corner of her mouth tugged up slightly. It was, she admitted. Daniel blinked. Did you just... Was that a smile? It was not. It absolutely was. Elindra ignored him, turning her focus to the horizon. Your ship? Where is it docked? Daniel sobered, slightly glancing ahead. There's a small landing pad just outside the city limits. If we get there fast enough, we can be off-world before they catch up. Elindra nodded. Then let us hurry. Daniel revved the engine of his mostly functional hoverbike and grinned. Race you. Elindra's ears twitched. You would lose. You don't know that. She shot ahead at a speed that made his hoverbike feel like an elderly space scooter. Daniel groaned. Okay, you might know that. With the city fading behind them and the docking pad on the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. And, knowing his luck, That feeling was probably right. The desert stretched out before them in endless waves of rust-colored sand, broken only by the occasional jagged rock formation. The sun, if the sickly green orb in the sky could be called a sun, hung low on the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows over the landscape. Daniel's hoverbike sputtered and coughed as it struggled to keep up with Alindra's, making an ominous clunk, clunk, clunk noise that he chose to ignore on principle. "Almost there," he muttered, patting the controls as if sheer optimism would keep the thing from falling apart. Alindra, effortlessly gliding ahead on her fully functional hoverbike, glanced back at him. "Are you talking to the machine?" "Listen, when you've been around ships and tech as long as I have, you learn that they respond better if you treat them with respect." She tilted her head. "Does that work?" "Not even a little," Daniel admitted, dodging a rock. "But it feels like it should, and that's what matters." Alindra didn't respond, but Daniel swore he saw the tiniest twitch of amusement at the corner of her mouth before she turned forward again. The docking pad finally came into view, a squat metal platform nestled between two rocky cliffs. Daniel let out a breath of relief when he spotted the Wayfarer, his battered but mostly reliable ship, waiting just where he'd left it. "Home, sweet home," he announced, guiding his hoverbike toward the ship's open ramp. Alindra followed, her movements precise, efficient. The moment she dismounted, she strode up the ramp and into the cargo bay like she owned the place. "Okay," Daniel muttered, shutting down his bike. "Glad you feel comfortable here." He followed her inside, smacking the control panel to seal the ramp behind them. The ship's interior was a chaotic mix of function and disrepair. Various wires dangled from open panels, a pile of tools littered the floor, and an old, questionably stable couch sat wedged against the wall. Alindra gave the place a once-over, her long ears flicking slightly. "You live here?" she asked, carefully stepping over a wrench. "Technically, yes," Daniel said, moving toward the cockpit, though calling it living might be a stretch. She watched as he plopped into the pilot's seat and began flicking switches. The ship hummed to life, the control panel blinking erratically before stabilizing. "Strap in," he said. "This might be a little—" A thud echoed from outside the ship. Daniel froze. Alindra immediately went on high alert, her posture shifting from casual observer to dangerous warrior in the span of a heartbeat. "You were saying," she murmured. "That it might be a very bad takeoff," Daniel corrected. Another thud, then a metallic clank. Daniel swore under his breath and pulled up the exterior cameras. The display flickered before revealing the very unwelcome sight of a squad of Varkesh soldiers moving into position around the ship, weapons drawn. "Okay, I'm open to suggestions," Daniel said, already reaching for the thrusters. "Take off. Now." Alindra's voice was firm, no hesitation. "See, I would love to do that," Daniel said. "But the moment we fire up the engines, they're going to start shooting. And while I am very confident in my piloting skills, I am less confident in the ship's ability to withstand high-powered energy blasts." Alindra's eyes flicked over the controls before she moved to the co-pilot's seat. "Is there another way out?" Daniel hesitated. "Technically?" Alindra arched a brow. "There's an emergency launch protocol," he admitted, "but it's unreliable." "Define unreliable." "Define safe first, and then I'll tell you how much this isn't that." Alindra exhaled sharply, then stood. "Where?" Daniel gestured toward the rear of the ship. She was already moving before he could finish the motion. A new voice crackled over the ship's external speakers. "Pilot of the Wayfarer, you are harboring stolen property. Surrender the artifact and the fugitive, and you may yet leave with your life." Daniel frowned. "Stolen property?" Alindra's voice echoed from the back of the ship. "They mean the stone." "Great. Love that. I was really hoping for something more negotiable." The Varkesh commander continued, his tone smug. "You have 10 seconds to comply." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Oh, classic bad guy move. Gotta give the 10 seconds ultimatum, huh?" Alindra reappeared, her expression grim. "Ready." "Fantastic. Here's hoping this works." He slammed his fist on the emergency launch panel. For a brief, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then with a deafening roar, the ship's backup thrusters exploded to life, sending the Wayfarer into an almost vertical ascent. The sudden force nearly knocked Daniel out of his chair. He let out an undignified yelp as the ship rocketed upward, the inertial dampeners barely keeping them from being flattened against the walls. Elindra, despite the chaos, barely flinched. "This," Daniel gasped, gripping the controls, "is why I call it unreliable." The ship shook violently as the Varkesh opened fire. Bright blue blasts streaked past the hull, one grazing the left wing and sending up sparks. "Shields are at 30%, Elindra reported. "Shields are at what?" 30%. Daniel let out a string of curses that would have made a space pirate proud. Okay, no problem. I can work with this." The ship lurched as another blast struck home. "Okay, maybe a little problem." Elindra's hands flew over the controls. "I suggest evasive maneuvers." "Oh, do you?" He yanked the controls hard to the right, sending the ship into a barrel roll that definitely wasn't entirely intentional. The Varkesh fighters scrambled to keep up as Daniel wove a reckless, zigzagging path through the upper atmosphere. With one final burst of speed, they punched through the last layer of the planet's atmosphere and into open space. The moment they were free, Daniel hit the hyperdrive switch. The engines screamed in protest, but, against all odds, held together. Stars blurred into streaks of light. Silence. Then finally, Daniel slumped back in his seat, breathless. Elindra turned to him, her expression unreadable. He let out a shaky laugh. "So, that went well." She exhaled, then, after a moment, said, "Surprisingly, yes." Daniel grinned. "See, I told you I had it under control." The ship's control panel sparked. Daniel sighed. "Mostly under control." Elindra simply shook her head. "Where are we headed?" Daniel frowned, considering. "That depends." "On what?" "On what exactly we just stole and why the Varkesh want it so badly." Elindra's expression darkened. Daniel sighed. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The ship's engines hummed softly, the only sound in the cockpit besides Daniel's fingers, drumming anxiously against the dashboard. The Wayfarer had just barely survived that last escape, and she wasn't being shy about letting them know it. Flickering lights, a low rattling somewhere in the walls, and an occasional thunk from deep in the hull that sounded like a very passive-aggressive complaint. Daniel leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Okay, good news first. We're alive." Elindra, perched in the co-pilot's seat, barely glanced at him. "And the bad news?" He gestured vaguely at the dashboard. "Everything else." She tilted her head, considering. "That seems accurate." Daniel gave her a flat look. "You really enjoy being right, don't you?" She didn't answer, which Daniel chose to interpret as a yes. He exhaled, stretching his arms behind his head. "All right, we need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with here." Elindra reached into the folds of her jacket and pulled out the small, unassuming stone that had somehow managed to make their lives significantly more complicated. Daniel stared at it. "That's it? That's what they were ready to shoot us out of the sky for?" Elindra's ears twitched slightly. "Looks can be deceiving." "I am aware," Daniel muttered, rubbing his shoulder. "I once bought a state-of-the-art hover cart from a guy on Xiphus 9 that turned out to be a wheelbarrow with a fancy paint job." Elindra ignored him, rolling the stone between her fingers. In the dim light of the cockpit, something flickered beneath its surface. Subtle, almost imperceptible, like a reflection that wasn't coming from any particular source. Daniel sat forward. "Huh, that's weird. You only just realized that?" "Okay, rude. I meant that it's doing something." He squinted at it. "Is it glowing?" Elindra hesitated, turning it slightly. The flicker pulsed again. But it wasn't just light. It was something deeper, something that seemed to shift within the stone itself, like a memory trying to surface. She frowned. "This is not ordinary." "Yeah, I got that part." Daniel reached out, hesitating for only a second before lightly tapping the surface of the stone. The reaction was immediate. A pulse of energy shot through the cockpit, sending a shockwave through the ship's systems. The lights flickered violently, alarms wailed in protest, and Daniel nearly fell out of his chair. "Oh, come on!" he yelped, scrambling to steady himself. "What now?" Elindra was already on her feet, her body tense. "The stone reacted to your touch." "Yeah, I felt that." The ship's systems continued to glitch, monitors flashing erratic patterns, the controls freezing up. A deep, resonating hum filled the space around them, vibrating through the floor, through their bones. Then suddenly it stopped. Silence. Daniel blinked. Okay, that was unsettling. Elindra glanced at the ship's display. We are no longer in hyperdrive. Daniel's stomach dropped. Wait, what? She tapped the console, bringing up the navigation screen. The ship was stationary, drifting in empty space, no nearby systems, no planets, no anything. Daniel groaned, running a hand down his face. Great. So not only do we have a possibly cursed rock, but it also kidnapped us into deep space. Elindra studied the screen, her expression unreadable. Number not random. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She pointed to a small anomaly on the star map, a faint, almost imperceptible distortion in space. It was subtle, barely even registering on the sensors, but it was there. Daniel's stomach twisted. Oh, that's never good. Elindra tilted her head slightly. You recognize it? I recognize that it looks a whole lot like a fold point, and in my extensive experience, fold points usually mean one of two things. He held up a finger. One, some fancy, high-tech deep space shortcut that no one has mapped yet. Then he held up a second finger. Two, a very bad idea. Elindra studied the anomaly for a long moment before closing her fingers around the stone. Then we should investigate. Daniel groaned. Of course you're going to say that. Elindra turned her gaze to him. Are you afraid? Daniel scoffed. Me? Afraid? Number cautious? Absolutely. Big difference. Elindra simply walked toward the cockpit door. Where are you going? She glanced back. To prepare. Daniel threw up his hands. Prepare for what? Elindra didn't answer. Daniel flopped back into his seat, muttering to himself. Prepare, she says. Like that's a normal response to discovering a potential tear in the fabric of space. He sighed. Why do I get the feeling I'm about to make another terrible life choice? The ship, as if in response, made a loud groaning creak. Daniel glared at the ceiling. Not helping. He exhaled, then, with all the enthusiasm of a man walking into certain doom, flipped the ship's controls and angled the Wayfarer toward the distortion. As they drifted closer, the space around them seemed to bend. Not like an optical illusion, but something deeper, realer. The stars beyond the anomaly twisted unnaturally, bending and stretching in ways that defied logic. Daniel swallowed hard. Really not loving this. Elindra reappeared, standing behind his seat. We are ready. You might be, Daniel muttered, but I'm about one existential crisis away from turning this ship around. Elindra placed a hand on his shoulder. Trust me. Daniel hesitated. Then reluctantly he nodded. With one final, bracing breath, he activated the thrusters. The ship surged forward, straight into the unknown. The moment the Wayfarer emerged from the fold point, Daniel felt an unsettling weight in his chest, like the universe itself was holding its breath. The ship's controls flickered erratically, stabilizing only after a few tense seconds. The viewport revealed a vast expanse of space, unlike any he'd ever seen before. It wasn't just space, it was something more. Colors shimmered in impossible hues, celestial formations bent and twisted in ways that made his brain ache just looking at them. It was beautiful and terrifying. Daniel let out a slow breath. Okay, that's definitely new. Elindra, standing beside him, studied the view with a quiet intensity. Her elongated ears twitched slightly, a subtle sign of thoughtfulness that Daniel had learned to read over the past few days. This is the lost sector, she said finally. My people called it Orshan Ra, the place where the ancients vanished. Daniel glanced at her. I feel like you could have mentioned that before we decided to jump headfirst into it. You would have hesitated, she replied simply. Yeah, because that's what rational people do before diving into legendary disappearances. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. Okay, fine. So what now? Elindra lifted the small stone in her palm. It pulsed faintly, responding to the energy around them. The closer they got, the stronger the resonance became. It wasn't just a random artifact. It was a beacon, a key to something hidden. Daniel watched as the stone emitted a soft vibration, almost like a heartbeat. That thing's leading us somewhere, isn't it? Elindra nodded. Yes, and we must follow. Daniel groaned. You and your musts. Fine. But if this turns out to be another, oh no, the ancient guardians are angry at us situation, I am leaving you here. Elindra smirked. Noted. The ship moved forward, gliding through the eerie, shifting space. The deeper they traveled, the more Daniel felt someone watching. The instruments flickered strangely, readings fluctuating between nothing at all and impossible energy levels. The Wayfarer was getting nervous, and frankly, Daniel couldn't blame her. Then suddenly, a structure emerged from the void. It wasn't a space station. It wasn't a planet. It was something ancient. Massive, intricate spires rose from a glowing core, twisting and spiraling in ways that defied physics. The material looked both solid and fluid, shifting as if responding to their presence. Symbols etched along its surface glowed faintly, resembling the same patterns embedded within the stone. Daniel exhaled. That is definitely not in any star charts. Elindra stepped forward, her voice quiet with awe. It's real. Daniel side-eyed her. I'm going to need you to start explaining faster before I do something stupid. She hesitated, then held up the stone. This place, it was built by the first explorers of my kind. A sanctuary, a vault of knowledge. And this, she held the stone higher, watching the symbols react, is the last key to unlock it. Daniel crossed his arms. So let me guess, you, being the noble heroine, want to go right in? Yes. He sighed deeply. Of course you do. The docking sequence was smoother than expected, as if the structure had been waiting for them. As the ship connected, a doorway appeared, liquid metal shifting to form an entrance. Daniel flexed his fingers. All right, let's get this over with. They stepped inside. The air hummed with energy, though it wasn't oppressive, it was welcoming. Lights activated as they moved, revealing towering halls lined with crystalline archives. The architecture was unlike anything Daniel had seen before, curved, seamless, an integration of nature and technology. Elindra led them with purpose, as if something was calling to her. At the center of the chamber, a pedestal awaited. She approached, placing the stone into a carved indentation. A pulse rippled through the walls. The entire structure woke up. Images flickered through the air, projections of knowledge, of star charts, of history long forgotten. Voices echoed in an ancient tongue, though the meaning seeped into Daniel's mind like a memory rediscovered. Elindra's eyes were wide with wonder. This is it, she whispered. The knowledge of my ancestors, their stories, their warnings, everything that was lost. Daniel exhaled, letting it sink in. So, what do we do with it? Elindra turned to him, a slow smile spreading across her face. We share it. Daniel let out a soft chuckle. You're going to make me a history smuggler, aren't you? She tilted her head. You could always not help. He gave her a flat look. Yeah, sure. I'll just abandon the ancient knowledge trove and go back to running cargo. That's totally on brand for me. He sighed dramatically. Guess I'm in. Elindra's expression softened. Thank you. Daniel shrugged. Yeah. Just promise me if an angry ancient AI wakes up and tries to melt our faces, you'll handle it. She smirked. Agreed. The knowledge vault had been unlocked, and the weight of responsibility settled between them. This was bigger than a simple delivery job, bigger than just them. As the Wayfarer left the ancient structure, carrying the knowledge of a lost civilization, Daniel realized something. The simple gift he'd given Elindra, one small, thoughtful gesture, had led them here, had led them to something far greater than either of them had imagined. And somehow, he wouldn't have had it any other way.